Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen wa sallallahu sallam wa baraka ala Nabi Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'een. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So welcome brothers and sisters to episode or installment number 3 from our series, a commentary on the last 10 chapters of the Quran. And we are now in chapter number 106, Surat Quraish. And as always, I like to begin with certain foundational information about the surah. The first thing that we always talk about are the names of the surah. Many of the surahs of the Quran have more than one name. There's a name that we commonly refer to it as, but quite often there are some other names that we're not aware of, and it's good to be aware of all of those names. So this surah has two names, Surat Quraish and Surat Li-Ilaf. And obviously, Surat Quraish, the first name, is taken from the main subject of the surah, and that is the tribe of Quraish. And this is the tribe which for at least a century or more than a century before the Prophet's birth had assumed absolute rulership over Mecca and undisputed custodianship of the sacred house of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Al-Kaaba. So Al-Quraish is the main subject, and that's why, and obviously they're mentioned in the first verse, and that's why the surah has been given that name. Also, the surah opens with the phrase Li-Ilaf, which could be translated as the taming or for the security of, and this is also a name by which the surah has been commonly referred, Surat Li-Ilaf, because these are the first words or the opening words of the surah. And these names are apparently ijtihadi. They are names which were not given by Allah Himself or given by the Prophet or given by the companions during the time of the Prophet and then tacitly approved or expressly approved of, but rather scholars after the time of a tashri'ah, after the time of legislation, they adopted these names and began to refer to the surahs by those names, and then those names caught on, and after that became widespread. The second discussion that we like to mention always, or the second point that we like to mention, is whether or not the surah is Makkiyah or Madaniyah. And there is some debate amongst the scholars about this particular surah. The majority of the scholars consider the surah to be Makkiyah, while a minority of the scholars consider the surah to be Madaniyah. Now there is no what we call sabab al-nuzul. There was no specific incident that prompted the revelation of this surah, and there is no background story. Like if you remember when we did Al-Fil, we mentioned that there was a background story. There's no background story for this particular surah, but there is something, a point which is noteworthy and provides meaningful context for the explanation of the surah. And that is that many of the commentators are of the opinion that this surah, Surat Quraish, is a continuation of the previous surah, Surat Al-Fil, and that they are linked and highly or closely related to one another. And some of the scholars, according to Ibn Qutaybah, have gone so far as to say that they are actually one surah, that Surat Al-Fil and Surat Quraish are actually one surah. And this is obviously a minority view, but you will see when we start explaining the surah how they are so closely linked and how one could come to the conclusion that they are actually one surah. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala begins the chapter by saying, Li-ila fi Quraish, for the security of Quraish. The opening words of the chapter can have any one of three possible meanings. The first possible meaning is that it is a continuation of the last verse of the previous surah, Surat Al-Fil. So it is as if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and He, Allah, made the army of Abraha like straw eaten up. فَجَعَلَهُمْ كَأَصْفٍ مَأْكُولٍ لِإِيلَافِ قُرَيْشٍ. He did this for the security, safety, protection of Quraysh. Meaning, He destroyed the owners of the elephant so that Quraysh would survive and continue to thrive. And this is the opinion of Al-Farra and the majority of the scholars of Tafsir. The second possible interpretation of this verse, Li-Ilaf fi Quraysh, is that the lamb of Li-Ilaf is for a ta'ajjub, which means it's a lamb to indicate the amazement of being appalled. In this case, the meaning, in light of the remaining verses of the surah, the meaning would be appalled by the security enjoyed by Quraysh and their refusal to thank the source of that security, Allah, the Lord of this house, by worshiping Him alone without any partners. And this is the opinion of Al-A'mash and Al-Kasa'i from the Mufassirin. Number 3, from the explanations of Li'ila fi Quraysh, is that the meaning is linked to the verses following it, and the meaning is actually a command. That when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says Li'ila fi Quraysh, the meaning is a command, and the command is thus: worship the Lord of the house for the security of the 2 caravans of winter and summer. So because He's given you security, worship Him. That is the meaning of Li'ila fi Quraysh. Now there is some debate about Quraysh. Some of the historians say that Quraysh, they are the descendants of Nadhr ibn Kinana. They are the descendants of Nadhr, the son of Kinana. While other historians say that they are the descendants of Fihr ibn Malik ibn Nadhr. So some of them say that they are descendants of Fihr, and some of them say they're descendants of Nadhr ibn Kinana. Either way, they are the descendants of Kinana, who was a descendant of Ismail, the son of Ibrahim Khalilullah alayhim as-salam. Now the name Quraysh comes from the word al-qirsh, which means al-kasb, to earn or to make a living. And this name fits the Qurayshis of the Prophet's time to a T, because they were merchants by trade, skilled at making money and amassing large quantities of it. So Quraysh from al-qirsh, which means what? To make money, to earn a living. And they were people who what? Well, were merchants by trade, and it was they had a knack for making money. Quraysh, they resided in the sanctuary of Al-Haram al-Makki, and were therefore safe from their enemies by virtue of the sacredness of the land that in which they lived in the hearts of the Arabs that surrounded them. But the Valley of Mecca, the problem with living in the Valley of Mecca, although it was sacred land and a place that the other Arabs had a certain level of reverence and respect for, the problem was that Mecca was barren, void of trees and vegetation. And Quraysh was only able to survive, therefore. There was no way they could grow crops. They couldn't be people of agriculture who could grow things and sustain and be self-sustaining. The only way that they could survive was through trade. And for this purpose, they adopted 2 journeys for trade each year. One southward toward Yemen in the winter, and one northward toward Syria in the summer. When they would take these trips, they would obviously have to leave the safe surroundings of the Haram, and they would therefore expose themselves to harm from their enemies. So when they were in Mecca, no one would harm them because it's the Haram. You can't do harm to the people of the Haram in the Haram. It's sacred land. You can't harm them. But when they would leave that, when they would leave the Haram, now they're exposing themselves to harm from their enemies. But because they were from the sacred land of Mecca, it was almost like they carried the sacredness and the sanctity of Mecca with them wherever they went. Anyone who thought to harm them, or thought to attack them, or thought to rob them, it would be said to that person, these are the people of the Haram. And out of respect, no one would mistreat them. It's almost like in combat, you're not supposed to harm the clergy. In combat, you're not supposed to harm the people who provide medical support and assistance. And so it's like these people, they're not supposed to be harmed, they're not supposed to be attacked, they're not supposed to be killed. It became like that for them. And so whether they were in Mecca, in their homes and in their land of residence, their place of residence, or if they left, they were always safe. And this is what Allah is referencing when He says, إِلَافِهِمْ رِحْلَةَ الشِّتَاءِ وَالصَّيْفِ. Their security in the caravans of winter and summer. that when they would leave, Allah blessed them that they were secure during these trips in the winter and summer, in the winter to Yemen and in the summer to Syria. Then Allah, He says, فَلْيَعْبُدُوا رَبَّ هَذَا الْبَيْتِ. So let them worship the Lord of this house. The meaning is, let them single Him out and make Him the sole object of their worship. لِيُوَحِّدُوا. Because they did, the pagans of Mecca, they did worship Allah. But they also associated partners with Allah in His worship. So Allah is saying, فَلْيَعْبُدُوا رَبَّ هَذَا الْبَيْتِ. Let them worship Allah alone. Because He, not their idols, saved them from the army of Abd'Llah and safeguards them from every other enemy. And it is He who made it possible for them to provide for themselves and sustain themselves by enabling them to safely travel for trade in winter and summer. And this is the meaning of the final sentence, الَّذِي أَطْعَمَهُم مِّن جُوعٍ وَآمَنَهُم مِّن خَوْفٍ. The one who has fed them, sparing them from hunger. Meaning, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one, not their idols, who has fed them and spared them from hunger, and therefore they should worship Him alone and not their idols. And أَطْعَمَهُم مِّن جُوعٍ and made them, وَآمَنَهُم مِّن خَوْفٍ and made them safe from fear. Spared them any fear. It was Allah who did this and not their idols, and therefore فَلْيَعْبُدُوا. And so therefore they should worship Him, لِيُوَحِّدُوا. They should single Him out and make Him the sole object of their worship. Lessons. What can we take away from the surah today, brothers and sisters? Number one, food and safety from harm are two of the greatest gifts of God. The greatest gifts that God gives to any human being. If you, brothers and sisters, if you have sustenance and you are safe, you have everything. If you are able to go to sleep and not fear that someone will kill you, not fear that a bomb will be dropped on your home, not fear that you can just be arrested without cause. If you can go to sleep with that type of safety and security, and on top of that, you have the food and drink that will sustain you and keep you alive, nourish your body, then you have everything. And in the hadith, the Prophet ﷺ, he said, "Man asbaha minkum aminan fi sirbi, mu'afan fi jasadi, indahu quta yawmihi, faka'annama hizat lahu dunya." Whoever amongst you awakens safe from harm to himself, physically healthy, and possesses provision sufficient for the day, it is as if the entire world has been planted at his feet. And how often do we, who enjoy these things in abundance, how often are we ungrateful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we complain because we don't have this and we don't have that, when there are people in the world, people from our community, Muslims in the world, who cannot say that they have one or both of these things. You have people who live in countries where they'll be asleep at night, and some occupying force will force their way into their home and arrest them without cause, take them away from their family. The family doesn't know where the person is, put that person in jail, torture them, perhaps kill them. They don't have eman. They don't have safety and security. You're in your home, sleeping in your bed, and someone just drops a bomb on you, and you're a civilian. You're not a combatant. This is the reality that some Muslims are living in, and some Muslims are living in the reality of not having the ability to put their hand to their mouth, not being able to feed themselves, not knowing where their next meal will come from. And some of us have seen those pictures of, those relief trucks coming to certain lands that have been ravaged by war and bringing bread. That's it. Bread. Not a meal, just bread. Just loaves of bread. Let's round, round pieces of bread and throwing them out, and people fighting over that. And then once they distributed all the bread that they can distribute, there'll be what? There'll be crumbs mixed in the mud of the ground where they did the distribution. And we've seen those pictures of children coming and picking the little pieces and crumbs out of the mud to eat it and sustain themselves. And we, the people who don't experience this, we have to stop being ungrateful when we have, in reality, because we have food and drink and because we have safety and security, we go to sleep safe, we wake up safe, we have everything, and we need to be more grateful. Number 2 from the lessons. When a person has been given these gifts, the gifts particularly of al-aman, safety, and their food and provisions for each day, he must be extremely thankful to his Creator. We have to be thankful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for giving us these specific favors. Number 3, thanks is not something which is merely expressed by the tongue. This is a problem too. We think that we're thanking Allah by saying Alhamdulillah, Alhamdulillah, wa shukrulillah. No, thanks is something that should be demonstrated, should be displayed, should be embodied. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, i'malu ala Dawood shukran. Oh, family of David, do thanks, show gratitude. Don't just say it with your tongue, show your gratitude in your actions or through your actions and behavior. Number 4 from the lessons, the best way to show our appreciation to Allah for these and other favors is by worshiping Him. You want to show Allah you appreciative of your food and your drink and your clothing and your shelter and your wife and your children and all the other gifts and favors He's given you. You want to show your appreciation? Worship Him. Worship Him. Be a better worshiper of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Don't just do the fara'id. Don't just do the 5 obligatory prayers. Do the sunan. Don't just fast Ramadan. Fast the voluntary fasting. 6 days of Shawwal, 3 days of the month, Yom Ashura, the 9 days leading up to the 10th of Dhul Hijjah. Fast those supererogatory fasts. These acts of worship are how we show Allah how much we appreciate Him. That's why He told Quraish, فَلْيَعْبُدُوا رَبَّ هَذَا الْبَيْتِ. Let them worship the Lord of this house and show their gratitude for the gifts and favors He has given them. Number 5 from the lessons, not worshiping Allah, worshiping Him poorly, or associating partners with Him in His worship is the greatest act of ingratitude. It's as if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying in a roundabout way, Quraish, they're not grateful. And why are they not grateful? Because they don't worship me, or they worship me, but they worship me along with what? Partners and associates. And last but not least from the lessons, lesson number 6, is that worshiping others along with Allah is like not worshiping Him, because we know that Quraysh, they used to worship Allah. But Allah says, فَلْيَعْبُدُوا رَبَّ هَذَا الْبَيْتِ, as if He's saying, you're not really worshiping me because you're associating partners with my worship. And in the hadith, the Qudsi hadith, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, مَنْ عَمِلَ عَمَلًا أَشْرَكَ فِيهِ مَعِيَ غَيْرِي تَرَكْتُهُ وَشِرْكَ. Whoever does an act of worship and associates in that worship along with me a partner or a rival, I will abandon him and his shirk. I will abandon him and his association. Meaning I won't accept his deed. It's as if he didn't worship me. And so this is critical for us to understand, brothers and sisters, that we need to know what is tawheed and what is shirk. We need to know this because sometimes we think we're worshiping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we think we're muwahideen, and we have mixed, some shirkiyat in our worship, and as a result we are not really worshiping Allah, and our acts of worship that we have associated partners with Allah in will not be accepted. Nas'al Allah as-salama wal afiyah. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to protect us and preserve us from any and all types of shirk. And with that we come to a close. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bless your houses, to bless your spouses, to bless your wives, to bless your children, to bless your entire families, to bless the rest of your day, and to make you blessed wherever you may be. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us from those who listen to the talk and follow the best of it. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us from those who He teaches beneficial knowledge, and who He truly benefits from that knowledge by making us from those who practice it. هذا وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على نبي محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.